Political activists pretending to be judges are coming out of the woodwork now to try and protect their constituents, the Democrat Party. Nothing else you see seems to be impeding or even remotely slowing down the Trump train in any noticeable fashion. The judicial system, you see, is now attempting to assert themselves into and usurp power from the executive branch. Case in point, the latest in a string of judges trying to stop the investigations into corruption by the Trump administration via his Doge squad is U.S. District Judge John J. McConnell. John J. McConnell, what a name. He issued a ruling on Monday stating that the Trump administration had violated his earlier temporary restraining order that he'd issued back on January 31st. His restraining order, or temporary restraining order, prohibited the administration from halting payments, of course, or grants and other federal programs. He didn't like that the Trump administration was cleaning up the corruption. However, the Trump team said to hell with that and just ignored his absurd ruling and continued to freeze some federal funds, prompting the judge to take further action. He is now, Judge McConnell, ordering the Trump administration to immediately restore frozen funds, and while his temporary restraining order remains in effect. The judge is clarifying that his order applies to all categorical pauses or freezes in obligations or disbursements based on the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, directive or the President's 2025 executive orders. And the judge's ruling specifically mentions the funding from the Inflation Reduction Act. The Trump administration, for their part, is arguing that the suspension is necessary to review federal funding and ensure that it aligns with the president's priorities. They contend that some of the frozen funds were not covered by the judge's original order and that certain funding was already under review for potential fraud. And this, my friends, is the biggest reason for this review period. We know, without a doubt, there is massive, uncontrolled fraud within the federal government. There is waste galore. It is happening in the hundreds of billions of dollars, perhaps even trillions of dollars, that are just being thrown out the window and wasted, or worse, being money laundered. We just don't know yet. And the Trump team is determined to annihilate this kind of fraud. And so they're going after the deep staters behind this abomination. This is an article from MSNBC posted yesterday. This is by a man named Jordan Rubin. Although coming from MSNBC, who knows, it could be a they-them. Anyway, it's titled, Federal Judge Says Trump Administration Violated Court Order in Funds Freeze Litigation. He writes, what happens if the Trump administration defies court orders? The question is top of mind these days after statements from Elon Musk and Vice President J.D. Vance broadly raised the possibility. On Monday, we got the beginnings of an answer to the question of how the courts might push back if judges believe their orders aren't being followed. The answer came in litigation over the administration's federal funds freeze, where a Rhode Island judge previously issued a temporary restraining order against the government. The plaintiff states, who brought the case, subsequently told the federal district's chief judge in a motion to enforce the order that they, quote, continued to be denied access to federal funds. Oh, the shock and horror. The government defendants opposed the motion, saying that they had made good faith, diligent efforts to comply with the injunction across the board spectrum of federal financial assistance implicated by the court's order. Now, Rubin goes on to write, naturally, the question arises, what happens if they don't? The judge seemed to answer the question somewhat obliquely at the very beginning of his written order, where he quoted this from a Supreme Court case about a lawyer being held in contempt. In other words, saying, hey, President Trump, I'll put you in contempt. He put an emphasis on a line from the case that said all orders and judgments, of course, must be complied with promptly. And persons who make private determinations of the law and refuse to obey an order generally risk criminal contempt, even if the order is ultimately ruled incorrect. Meaning, I'm the boss. You do what I say because I'm a judge. I wear a black robe, Mr. President. Now, Rubin asks, is contempt even a possibility? Well, Judge McConnell, Rubin writes, suggested so. But we'll see what happens if there isn't a clear compliance, according to the judge. Of course, as we saw in a different Donald Trump context, namely his criminal trial, where he serially violated a court order and faced no significant penalty for doing so. He's not happy about that, by the way. The existence of a court order and a finding that someone violated it is only as useful as the penalty imposed. And see, here's the rub, is guess who imposes such penalties? It would be the executive branch. There's a problem here, isn't there? Now, here is how I see all of this. I believe that these judicial activists are attempting to get Donald Trump to just ignore them and move on with his agenda, setting up the left to be able to accuse Trump of being drumroll please, a dictator, which they believe might harm him, and maybe even finally allow them to impeach him. Oh, lordy Lou, if only they could get this done. However, not only is this approach tired and old, and we already lived through this through the 2016-2020 time period with Donald Trump, with the endless Russia, collusion, and impeachment. In this particular case, this approach appears to be backfiring. In fact, my friends, recent polls are indicating that President Donald Trump's approval rating has now reached a new all-time high of 53%. Despite everything the left, including these activist judges, have thrown at the Trump administration, despite all the ongoing legal challenges, the criticisms of the administration's actions, it doesn't stick to the president. It doesn't hurt him. The American people simply don't care. The American public just wants all this overwhelming corruption that has been festering for decades to end. And at least for now, it appears that they are willing to have Trump just steamroll his opponents. They just want this absurd story to end. According to a CBS News YouGov poll released just yesterday, 53% of American adults now approve of Trump's performance. This, by the way, marks the highest approval rating of his political career. This surpasses all previous highs from both his first and second terms so far. They perceive Donald Trump as effective here, which is what the American people want him to do. 58% of respondents to this poll are saying that Trump is effective. That's how they describe him in his role. 70% of those surveyed believe Trump is doing what he promised during his campaign. And of course, he has strong Republican support. 86% of his party approve of his job performance. And Trump's approval rating among independents has actually gone up, with 41% now approving of his performance. All these attempts to constrain Trump's actions through the judicial activism only appears to have had the unintended effect of helping Donald Trump. It is a rallying cry for his base. The judicial activism is galvanizing Trump supporters who view these actions as unjust attempts to obstruct his agenda. Many voters are perceiving the judicial actions as overstepping their authority, potentially sympathizing with Trump's position. Worse still for the left, this ongoing legal battle is only keeping Trump in the spotlight, reinforcing his image as a fighter against the evil establishment. This is the same stupid mistake that they made by trying to go after Trump criminally leading up to the election. All that did was generate sympathy for Donald Trump. You would think that they would have learned a lesson from their catastrophic failure this past November, but no. The Democrat Party, the leftist activist judges are using the same old, tired, boring tactics that they used in the past. It's always, Trump's a Nazi. Trump is Hitler. Elon Musk is now a Nazi. Elon Musk is Hitler Jr. Dictators, abuses of power, blah, 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 blah. It's the same boring, old, tired playbook that the Democrat Party and their ilk just keep repeating. The problem now is that they've cried wolf far too long. The American people see through the nonsense, and so it's failing to work. And worse still for the Democrat Party, in many places, strong traditional Democrat bastions are now shifting to Trump. Donald Trump now holds a net approval rating across all brackets. For example, let's talk about minority support that's growing. A poll by Atlas Intel showed that 69% of black voters now express approval of Trump's presidency compared to a 50% of white voters. This is enormously problematic for the Democrat Party. So, despite all these legal challenges, Trump's policy initiatives appear to be resonating with the massive, overwhelming portion of the electorate. 59% of respondents, for example, approve of the Trump administration's program to deport illegal aliens. 64% are in favor of sending U.S. troops to the southern border. Imagine that. A majority of voters, now 52%, believe that the nation is moving in the right direction. This is a huge shift from earlier polls. These rising approval ratings suggest that all these legal challenges and judicial pushback and the activism against Trump's administration is backfiring. Instead of diminishing his support, they are only reinforcing Trump's narrative that he is fighting corruption, that he is going up against the deep state, these establishment institutions that want him gone. And so it's resonating with not only his hardline base, but is continuing to attract ever more people outside the Republican tent. And so I believe that the more that the left plays these corrupt political games and legal challenges, the more Donald Trump's support will continue to grow. This is a failure to see the forest from the trees, so to speak, with the left. They are not wisely choosing to pick and choose the right time to attack Trump and his agenda, and instead are just attacking anything and everything he does, which then leaves no doubt in the public's mind that it's just all political resistance, that none of it is real. And this is setting the Democrat Party up to get destroyed politically. The Democrat Party is currently facing an unprecedented crisis in public opinions. Recent polls are showing that their unfavorability rating has reached historic highs. According to a Quinnipiac University poll released in late January, the Democrat Party's unfavorable rating has now reached a staggering 57%, my friends. This is the highest unfavorability rating for the party since Quinnipiac began tracking this metric all the way back in 2008. And that same poll is showing that only 31% of voters even view the Democrat Party favorably. This is catastrophic. The party is facing total collapse if they don't change their ways, and fast. They are becoming a huge national joke. The majority of Americans are appalled that instead of focusing on fixing America's problems, they have instead been putting all their attention on stupid social issues like the LGBTQ plus stuff or abortion, rather than addressing economic concerns and inflation, which affects all Americans, not just some. The party's inability to effectively govern and, say, navigate post-pandemic challenges has eroded all public trust in the party. They have lost the working class. They have lost the rural areas, which used to be strongholds for their party. And now, with Trump's resurgence, people have something tremendously positive to attach themselves to. Just look at the way the president conducts himself. Everything is always on a positive spin on everything. There's always that can-do attitude, his fight, fight, fight mantra. It resonates with an American public that is craving a return to the days when pride in this country and the good that we could do around the world was part of our cultural identity. Whether true or not, that is how Americans saw themselves. Just look at movies back in the 80s. The Democrat Party has forgotten all of this. And the price that they are now paying for that, I believe, is only just beginning.